I finished my consulting project in Seattle, 3 days ahead of schedule. 3 months of 60-hour weeks, endless client meetings, and sleeping in corporate housing had finally paid off. The $95,000 I pulled in as senior marketing director kept our household afloat, while Brendan's freelance graphic design work brought in maybe $30,000 on a good year. I thought about calling him, but decided a surprise would be better. God knows our 7-year marriage needed some spontaneity after everything we'd been through. The 2-hour flight from Seattle to Portland felt endless. I kept thinking about the pregnancy test from 18 months ago. 2 pink lines that disappeared in a miscarriage at 8 weeks. We'd been trying for 3 years since then, and this consulting gig was supposed to give us the financial cushion until we needed to start fertility treatments. At 35, I felt the biological clock ticking louder every month. Brendan, at 32, kept saying we had time, but I knew better. When I turned onto our street in the Hawthorne district, I noticed cars lined up in front of our house. Lots of them. Blue and pink balloons decorated our front porch, and a banner reading, "Welcome our little miracle," stretched across the entrance. My stomach dropped. Had Brendan organized some kind of celebration for my return? But how would he know I was coming home early? I parked down the block and walked slowly toward the house. The front door was propped open, and I could hear laughter spilling out. Female voices, mostly. I stepped inside and froze. In the center of our living room stood Whitney, my best friend since college, and my maid of honor, visibly 6 months pregnant. My mother-in-law Gloria was rubbing Whitney's belly, while my own mother, Diane, arranged gifts on our dining table. This wasn't a welcome home party. This was a baby shower. "So is the nursery ready?" I heard my Aunt Beverly ask. "Almost," Whitney replied, her hand resting on her bump. "Brendan insisted on painting it himself. He's been working on it every weekend." My legs felt weak. Every weekend. Every weekend while I was in Seattle, working my arse off to pay for this house, this life, this marriage. I'd been sending money home to cover the $3,200 monthly mortgage, while Brendan supposedly focused on building his design portfolio. That's when Brendan walked in from the kitchen, carrying a tray of drinks. He approached Whitney from behind and wrapped his arms around her, his hands settling protectively over her belly. The gesture was so intimate, so natural, that everyone smiled. Everyone except me. "We just need to set up the crib," he said softly into her ear. "We picked it out together last week." The words hit me like physical blows. We together last week. While I was presenting quarterly projections to executives in Seattle, my husband was furniture shopping with my best friend for their baby. My mother spotted me first. Her face went white, then red, then white again. She quickly walked over, grabbing my arm with trembling fingers. "Meredith, sweetheart," she whispered urgently. "We weren't expecting you today. Let's go outside and talk." I yanked my arm away. "Talk about what, Mom? About how my husband got my maid of honor pregnant while I was working to support this family?" The room went dead silent. Whitney's face drained of color. Brendan stood frozen behind her, his hands still on her belly, like some twisted nativity scene. The other guests, neighbors, family members, people I'd known for years, all stared at me like I was the problem. "Meredith," Brendan started, finally stepping away from Whitney. "I can explain." "Don't," I said, surprised by how calm my voice sounded. Just don't. My Aunt Beverly cleared her throat uncomfortably. Maybe we should give you some privacy. No, I interrupted. Stay. I want witnesses for this. I looked around the room at all the familiar faces. I want everyone to hear how my marriage ended. Gloria stepped forward, her expression stern. Meredith, you need to think about Whitney's condition. This stress isn't good for the baby. I let out a laugh that sounded foreign to my own ears. Her condition. Her condition. I had a condition too, Gloria. I was pregnant 2 years ago, remember? Where was your concern for stress then? Oh, right. You were too busy telling me that maybe losing the baby was God's plan because I worked too much. The silence that followed was deafening. Whitney started crying, which made several women rush to comfort her. My own mother tried to approach me again. Honey, I know this is difficult, but... Difficult for who? I snapped. For me, who just discovered my entire life is a lie. Or for all of you who have to pretend you didn't know about this for months. Mrs. Peterson from next door shifted uncomfortably in her chair. I'd always wondered why she'd given me those pitying looks when I came home from work. Now I understood. She'd probably been watching Brendan and Whitney play house while I was gone. Brendan finally found his voice. Meredith, can we please talk privately? You're making a scene. A scene? I stepped closer to him, noting how he instinctively moved protectively toward Whitney. You want to know what a scene looks like? A scene would be me telling everyone how you convinced me to take that consulting job in Seattle. How you said the extra money would help us start our family. How you held me while I cried about being away from home, promising you'd be here waiting for me. I turned to Whitney, who was sobbing into a tissue. Did he tell you that story, Whitney? About how his cruel, ambitious wife chose career over family? Or did he go with the classic, we're practically separated lie? It wasn't like that, Whitney whispered. We didn't plan this. Of course you didn't, I said. These things just happen, right? You accidentally fell into bed with my husband. Multiple times, for months, and then accidentally got pregnant. Several guests started gathering their purses, clearly uncomfortable with the direction this was heading. I didn't blame them. This wasn't the tidy family drama they'd signed up for when they came to celebrate a baby. My mother made one last attempt. Meredith, maybe if you'd been home more. Stop! My voice cut through the room like a blade. Just stop. I was home plenty, Mom. I was home paying the mortgage. I was home covering the utilities when Brendan's freelance work dried up. I was home crying myself to sleep after the miscarriage while he comforted my best friend. I walked over to the gift table and picked up a wrapped present at random. This one's yours, isn't it, Mom? I tore off the wrapping paper to reveal a baby outfit with tiny ducks on it. How thoughtful. I hope you kept the receipt. Meredith, stop, Brendan pleaded, trying to take the gift from my hands. You're being cruel. Cruel? I looked at him incredulously. I'm being cruel? You got my best friend pregnant while I was working 60-hour weeks to support us, and I'm the cruel one? Gloria stood up, her face flushed with indignation. Brendan was lonely. You were never here, always working, always traveling. A man has needs. Needs? I laughed again, that same bitter sound. You're absolutely right, Gloria. A man does have needs, like the need for a roof over his head, which I provided, the need for food on his table, which I paid for, the need for health insurance, which came from my job, but apparently his biggest need was to screw my best friend in the bed I paid for. The room erupted in gasps and uncomfortable shuffling. Mrs. Peterson actually covered her mouth in shock, though I suspected she'd heard worse gossip over her back fence. My cousin Sarah grabbed her purse and headed for the door, mumbling something about needing to pick up her kids. "Language, Meredith," my mother hissed, as if profanity was the real problem here. "Language?" I spun around to face her. "You're worried about my language. Where was this concern when your son-in-law was lying to your daughter for months? When he was convincing me to take a job 3 states away so he could play house with my maid of honor?" Diane's face crumpled. "We didn't know how to tell you. We thought maybe if we waited..." "Waited for what? For the baby to be born? For me to figure it out when Whitney started bringing her child to family dinners? Or you all just hoping I'd be so grateful to have any family at all that I'd accept this arrangement?" Beverly tried to intervene. "Meredith, honey, you're upset. Maybe we should all take a breath." "I'm not upset," I said, my voice eerily calm. "I'm enlightened. For the first time in months, maybe years, I can see clearly." I looked around the room one final time, taking in all the faces that had once felt like family. My gaze lingered on Whitney, who was clutching her belly protectively while tears streamed down her face. She looked so young, so vulnerable. But then I remembered all the times she'd called me while I was in Seattle, asking about my marriage, fishing for information about when I'd be coming home. "You know what the really beautiful part is?" I continued, my voice gaining strength. "While I was in Seattle, I wasn't just working. I was also making some very interesting discoveries about asset protection and financial independence." Brendan's face went pale. "What are you talking about?" "I'm talking about how this house is in my name, how the cars are in my name, how every single bank account, investment, and piece of property we own is in my name, because I'm the one who earned the money to buy it all." The color drained from his face completely. "Meredith, you can't be serious." "Dead serious." I picked up my purse from where I'd dropped it by the door. "I suggest you start looking for a job, Brendan. A real job, because your days of living off my income are over." Whitney spoke up for the first time since her pathetic excuse about not planning this. "Meredith, please, think about the baby. You need," I cut her off, "the same way I needed my best friend's support when I was grieving my miscarriage? The same way I needed my husband's loyalty while I worked myself to exhaustion for our future?" I shook my head. "Your needs stopped being my responsibility the moment you decided to betray me." "But where will we go?" Whitney's voice was barely a whisper. "I honestly don't care." The words came out colder than I'd intended, but I didn't soften them. "You're both adults who made adult choices. Figure it out like adults." My mother stepped forward one last time. "Meredith, this isn't you. You're not this vindictive person. We raised you better than this." "You raised me to be responsible," I corrected. "To work hard, to sacrifice for family, to put others' needs before my own. And look where that got me." I gestured around the room. Standing in my own living room, watching my family celebrate my husband's affair baby. "It's not an affair baby," Gloria protested. "Brendan and Whitney are in love. They're going to be a family." "On whose dime?" I asked pointedly. "Because unless Brendan has suddenly developed actual job skills in the last 3 months, that family is going to be living in poverty." The silence that followed was broken only by Whitney's quiet sobbing. I could see the wheels turning in several heads as the financial reality of the situation began to sink in. Brendan's freelance work was sporadic at best. He'd been completely dependent on my income for years. Without me, He had nothing to offer Whitney except empty promises and good intentions. "Keep the house," I said finally, slinging my purse over my shoulder. "Keep the gifts. Keep each other. But understand this, I'm done being the bank for your fairy tale romance." I headed for the door, then paused with my hand on the knob. "Oh, and Whitney, when you're up at 3 a.m. with a screaming baby and no money for formula, because your boyfriend can't hold down a job, remember this moment. Remember that you had a friend who would have supported you through anything until you decided my husband was more important than our friendship." "Meredith, wait," Brendan called after me, his voice cracking with desperation. "We can work this out. We can go to counselling. We can—" "We?" I turned back to look at him. "There is no we anymore, Brendan. There's you. There's your pregnant girlfriend. And there's me. And I'm done." I walked out of that house without looking back. My hands were shaking. My heart was racing. But underneath the shock and hurt, I felt something I hadn't experienced in years. Relief. The pretending was over. The lies were exposed. The careful balancing act of supporting a man who contributed nothing while sacrificing my own needs was finished. I got in my car and drove to the Marriott downtown, where I checked into a suite for the week. I needed space to think, to plan, to figure out my next moves without the emotional weight of that house pressing down on me. As I signed the hotel register, I realized this was the first decision I'd made in years that was entirely for me. The next morning, I called in sick to work for the first time in 3 years and made an appointment with Victoria Mason, a divorce attorney who specialized in high-asset cases. Her office was in downtown Portland's financial district, all glass and steel that reflected my new reality perfectly. Clean, sharp, unforgiving. Victoria was a woman in her early 50s, with silver hair and the kind of direct gaze that said she'd seen every variation of marital betrayal possible. When I finished telling my story, she leaned back in her leather chair and smiled. "Let me get this straight," she said, flipping through the financial documents I'd brought. "You've been the sole income earner for 7 years. The house, cars, and all major assets are in your name. Your husband has no significant income history, and he's now expecting a child with your former best friend." "That's correct. And they think they're going to continue living in your house while you support them?" "Apparently." Victoria's smile widened. "Oh, this is going to be fun." She explained Oregon's divorce laws with the efficiency of someone who'd navigated these waters countless times. Since we had no children together, and all assets were clearly mine, the process would be straightforward. Brendan could try to claim spousal support, but given his affair and complete financial dependence, his chances were essentially zero. "How long will this take?" I asked. 6 to 8 months if he cooperates. Longer if he fights. But honestly, what's he going to fight with? He can't afford a decent lawyer. That afternoon, I received the first of many desperate phone calls from Brendan. I let them all go to voicemail, but I listened to everyone. They followed a predictable pattern: confusion, anger, bargaining, and finally, panic. "Meredith, please call me back. We need to talk about this like adults. This is insane. You can't just throw away 7 years of marriage." "Fine. I made a mistake. But we can work through this. Other couples have survived worse. Whitney's crying constantly. The stress isn't good for the baby. Please, just call me back." The bank called about the mortgage payment. "You need to transfer the money like always." That last message made me laugh out loud in my hotel suite. Like always. As if nothing had changed. As if I'd discovered his affair and somehow still be expected to fund his comfortable life with my replacement. I didn't transfer the money. 3 weeks later, Victoria called with an update. Your husband's attorney wants to meet. Apparently, Brendan's having some financial difficulties. The meeting took place in Victoria's conference room. Brendan looked terrible. Thinner, with dark circles under his eyes, and an ill-fitting suit that I recognized as one I'd bought him 2 years ago. His lawyer, a tired-looking man named Jerry something, spread papers across the table like he was dealing cards in a losing game. Mrs. Walker is being unreasonable, Jerry began, then caught himself. Ms. Reed. Sorry, she's going back to her maiden name. As is her right, Victoria replied smoothly. What exactly do you think is unreasonable about a woman keeping her own assets after discovering her husband's affair? My client admits he made mistakes, but he's willing to attend counselling. They've been married for 7 years. Surely that entitles him to some consideration. 7 years during which he contributed nothing financially, while my clients supported him entirely. 7 years that ended when he impregnated her best friend. Victoria's tone could have frozen water. What consideration do you think he deserves? Brendan finally spoke up, his voice hoarse. Meredith, please. I know I hurt you, but Whitney's due in 3 months. We have nowhere to go. I looked at him across the table. This man I'd once loved enough to marry, to support, to build a life with. He looked defeated, desperate, and for a moment I almost felt sorry for him. Almost. You should have thought about that before you decided my best friend was worth more than our marriage, I said quietly. It wasn't like that. I was lonely. You were never home. I felt abandoned. You felt abandoned? I leaned forward. I was working 60-hour weeks to pay for the house you were fucking my friend in. I was missing family dinners and social events and quiet evenings at home because I was building our financial future. And you felt abandoned? His lawyer shifted uncomfortably. Even Jerry seemed to realize his client didn't have much of a case. What do you want from me, Brendan? I continued. Do you want me to apologize for working hard? Do you want me to feel guilty for being successful? Do you want me to keep paying your bills while you start a family with someone else? I want you to be reasonable, he said, a hint of his old entitlement creeping back into his voice. I can't support Whitney and the baby on what I make freelancing. Then get a real job. It's not that simple. I'm 32. I don't have traditional work experience. That's not my problem anymore. Victoria ended the meeting shortly after that. As we gathered our papers, she mentioned almost casually that the house would need to be vacated within 30 days of the final divorce decree. Brendan's face went white. 30 days, Jerry sputtered. That's not reasonable. They need time to find alternative housing. They've had months to figure out their living situation, Victoria replied. My client has been more than generous in allowing them to remain in her house this long. 2 months later, the divorce was final. I kept everything, the house, the cars, the savings accounts, the investment portfolio I'd built over 7 years of careful planning. Brendan got exactly what he'd brought into the marriage. Nothing. The eviction was scheduled for a Tuesday morning in October. I made sure to be there, parked across the street where I could see everything. At exactly 9 a.m., the sheriff's deputies arrived with the locksmith. Brendan came out of the house carrying a cardboard box, his face a mask of barely controlled panic. Whitney waddled behind him, 8 months pregnant and sobbing. They'd accumulated an impressive pile of belongings on the front lawn, mostly things I'd bought over the years that they apparently thought were theirs. Mrs. Peterson stood in her yard watching the whole thing, her arms crossed with the satisfied expression of someone whose neighborhood gossip had finally paid off in entertainment value. Other neighbors gathered on porches and behind curtains, pretending not to stare. I watched as Brendan loaded Whitney into a beat-up Honda that must have belonged to one of her relatives. The box barely fit in the trunk. As they drove away, I felt a strange sense of completion wash over me. This chapter of my life was officially closed. The house felt different when I walked back inside that evening. Empty, but not in a sad way. Empty like a clean slate, like possibility, like freedom. 6 months after the divorce was finalized, I ran into my cousin Sarah at Whole Foods. She looked uncomfortable when she saw me, glancing around like she was hoping to escape down the organic produce aisle. "Meredith," she said awkwardly. "How are you doing?" "Great, actually. How's the family?" She shifted her weight from foot to foot. "They're good. Listen, I heard about Brendan and Whitney." I raised an eyebrow. "Oh. They broke up. She moved back in with her parents after the baby was born. I guess things didn't work out the way they planned." I wasn't surprised. Sarah filled me in on the details she'd gleaned from mutual friends. Whitney had given birth to a daughter in November. Brendan had lasted exactly 6 weeks of sleepless nights and dirty diapers before the reality of single parenthood on minimum wage hit him. He'd been working at a big box store, stocking shelves for $12 an hour, barely making rent on a studio apartment in southeast Portland. According to Sarah, Whitney had expected Brendan to step up, to become the devoted father and provider she'd imagined. Instead, she got a man who'd never learned to handle responsibility because he'd always had someone else to handle it for him. When the baby developed colic and cried for hours every night, when formula and diapers ate up most of their grocery budget, when the pediatrician bills started piling up, their fairy tale romance crumbled fast. "She's filing for child support," Sarah added quietly. "But apparently he doesn't make enough to pay much." "Good luck to her," I said, genuinely meaning it. That baby deserves support from her father. The irony wasn't lost on me. Whitney had destroyed our friendship for a man who couldn't even support his own child. She'd traded a loyal friend who would have helped her through anything for a deadbeat dad who bailed at the moment things got difficult. Sarah hesitated, then asked, "Do you ever think about reaching out to her? I mean, you two were so close for so long." "Were we?" I loaded organic apples into my cart, considering the question. "I thought we were, but real friends don't sleep with each other's husbands. Real friends don't spend months lying to your face while plotting to steal your life." Maybe she was just confused. Maybe she thought she loved him. Maybe she thought she loved the lifestyle I was providing him, I corrected. The house, the financial security, the comfort of never having to worry about bills. Too bad she didn't realize that lifestyle came from my work, not his charm. I left Sarah standing there and finished my shopping. As I drove home to my new condo in the Pearl District, I reflected on how much had changed in less than a year. The condo was smaller than the house, but infinitely more mine. Modern, clean, with floor-to-ceiling windows that overlooked the city skyline. No memories of betrayal in the walls. No ghosts of a marriage that had been dying for years while I was too busy working to notice. My phone rang as I was putting away groceries. The caller ID showed my mother's number. I'd been expecting this call for months. "Meredith, honey, We need to talk. Hello, Mum. What about? About Brendan. He came by the house yesterday. I paused in folding my reusable grocery bags. And? He looks terrible, sweetheart. Thin, exhausted. He's working retail and can barely afford his apartment. He asked if I thought you might be willing to help him out just until he gets back on his feet. The audacity was breathtaking. He wants me to give him money? Not give, maybe a loan. He's still family, in a way. No, Mom, he's not. He's my ex-husband who cheated on me with my best friend. The only family connection he had to us was through marriage, and he destroyed that himself. But Meredith, he has a daughter now. That little girl shouldn't suffer because her father made mistakes. You're right. She shouldn't suffer. Her father should get a better job, or 2 jobs, or whatever it takes to support the child he created. That's what responsible adults do. Diane sighed heavily. When did you become so hard? The question stung, but only for a moment. I became realistic, Mom. I spent 7 years being soft, being understanding, being the supportive wife who sacrificed everything for her husband's comfort. Where did that get me? Alone in a room full of people celebrating my replacement. But you're successful now. You have more than enough money. Would it really hurt you to help them? It's not about the money, I said, though even as I said it, I knew it partly was. It's about the principle. Brendan made choices. Whitney made choices. They chose each other. They chose to betray me. They chose to start a family without considering how they'd support it. Those choices have consequences. So you're just going to let him struggle? I'm going to let him be an adult, I corrected. Something I should have made him do years ago, instead of enabling his dependence. After I hung up, I poured myself a glass of wine and stood at my windows, watching the city lights come on. My mother's words echoed in my head. Had I become hard? Maybe. But I'd also become free. I'd gotten a promotion at work 6 months ago, regional director for the Pacific Northwest. The extra responsibility came with a substantial raise and the kind of respect I'd been craving for years. My colleagues saw me as competent, decisive, someone who got things done. They didn't know about the messy divorce or the public humiliation. They just knew I was good at my job. I'd also started dating again, casually. Nothing serious yet, but it was nice to remember what it felt like to be wanted rather than needed. To have conversations with men who contributed equally, who had their own careers and goals and bank accounts. Sometimes I wondered if I should feel guilty about Brendan's struggles, about Whitney raising her daughter with minimal support. But every time that guilt crept in, I remembered the baby shower. I remembered standing in my own living room, watching my family celebrate my replacement. I remembered the months of lies, the careful deception, the way everyone I trusted had chosen to protect my betrayers, instead of me. Brendan was 33 years old. If he couldn't figure out how to support his daughter, that was his failure, not mine. I'd spent enough years being his safety net. Whitney was 29 and had chosen to get involved with a married man with no job prospects. She could figure out single motherhood the way millions of other women had throughout history. As for me, I was finally living the life I'd been working towards for years. Free from users and liars, surrounded by people who valued my contributions, financially secure through my own efforts. It had taken a devastating betrayal to get here, but I was grateful for the clarity it had given me. I was no longer anyone's backup plan, emotional support system, or meal ticket. I was just Meredith, and for the first time in my adult life, that was more than enough.